Floyd Dent was a county road assessor for Cardin County, Kentucky, and in the third week of October 1914, he was the first outside man to set foot on the Merrow property in longer than anyone in Bledsoe could say with certainty. He had been sent up Blackhollow Ridge ahead of a timber survey. A logging concern out of Harlan was proposing a spur road through the upper hollow, and the Merrow place sat at the only flat stretch of ground on the ridge above the second creek crossing, exactly where a man with a surveyor's rod would have to stop to mark his chain. He stopped. He marked, and then he stood for a long time in the yard of a working farm with no people in it. The garden had been properly put up for winter, not neglected or abandoned mid-season, but tended and closed out, the way a person closes a garden when they fully intend to be standing in it the following spring. The smokehouse had meat in it. The hog pen held 2 sows and a boar, poorly fed by that point, but alive, which told Dent that whatever had taken the Merrows out of Blackhollow Ridge had not done so more than a few weeks prior. The cabin door stood open by an inch. No wind that afternoon to account for it. Dent put 2 fingers to the planking and pushed it back and looked inside. The table had dishes on it, washed and stacked in even rows, not the wreckage of a meal broken off in urgency, but the orderly arrangement a woman makes when she has finished for the evening and expects to use the same dishes in the morning. He counted them. 7 dishes. He had been told the Merrow family ran to 7. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. He walked the property for the better part of an hour before riding back down to report to the sheriff's office in Bledsoe. What he told Deputy Amos Callahan that afternoon, and what Callahan entered into the county daybook in his small, careful hand, is the first document in what became the Merrow file, a file that grew over the following 3 months to 11 pages before it was closed without resolution, and that was subsequently reduced, by hands other than Callahan's, to 4. Cardin County in 1914 occupied the last fold of the Cumberland Plateau before the mountains released into coal country further west. The ridge roads were mud for 6 months, and stone-hard ruts for the other 6, and a rider who left Bledsoe at first light could reach the upper hollow by mid-morning in fair weather, and could not always reach it at all when the weather was otherwise. The nearest telegraph was 14 miles south by road in Combe Station. The circuit judge covered 3 counties on a route that brought him to Bledsoe twice yearly, on a schedule he could not always be held to. This was not particular to Cardin County. In the upper hollows of that part of Kentucky, the geography arranged itself in a way that made outside authority a seasonal and approximate thing rather than a constant one, and the families who had built their places above the last road bend had long since organized their lives around that fact. The Merrows had been on that ridge since at least the 1870s. A man named Silas Merrow appears in the Cardin County agricultural census of that decade as the holder of 80 acres of mixed timber and bottomland above Blackhollow Creek, a farmer and part-time tanner, 51 years of age, born in Harlan County, household of 4. By 1914, the household had grown to 7. Silas himself, whose age was entered variously in county documents as anywhere from 78 to 86, and who was, by any calculation, well past the age at which men of his frame and in that country generally endured. His son Clem, 43, who had extended the family's operation to include hogs and a kitchen garden alongside the tobacco allotment his father had held on the lower flat, Clem's wife Della, whose maiden name appears in no county document, and 4 children ranging from 6 to 14, identified in the available record only by their relation to Clem and by no other particular. The family came down to Bledsoe twice yearly to trade and to collect what they needed for the months ahead. The county physician attended the property exactly once during the entirety of that period, in 1910, when Clem opened a vein in his forearm with a draw knife at his workbench and could not close the wound without outside help. Beyond that single visit, the Merrows left almost nothing in the county's official record. They paid their taxes, they came down the ridge, they went back up. The nearest thing to a neighbor they possessed was Hezekiah Pruitt, whose corn farm and bee yard occupied the far side of a wooded saddle half a mile to the north of the Merrow property line. Pruitt was 62 years old in October of 1914. He had shared that ridge with the Merrow family for 27 years without dispute or occasion. When Deputy Callahan rode up to examine the abandoned property, Pruitt was the first man he went to. The statement Callahan took from him that afternoon runs to 2 pages in the file and is the only document from the original 11 that has come down intact. Pruitt had last seen the Merrow family in the second week of September, 6 weeks before Dent came up with his surveyor's rod. He had been splitting wood on the near side of the saddle, he said, and had looked over the ridge toward the Merrow chimney, as he did most mornings by long habit, to confirm that the people he shared a mountain with were alive and in residence. The chimney was smoking. The family was visible in the yard, all 7 of them. Pruitt told Callahan he had not gone over to speak, which was unusual, because the 2 families had held a custom of periodic visiting that had run without interruption for as long as either could remember. He had not gone over, he said, because of the way they were standing. All 7 were in the yard, facing the north tree line, facing the timber at the far edge of the cleared ground, standing the way a person stands when watching something approach or waiting for something to show itself from cover. They were not working, they were not speaking to each other. He watched them for close to a quarter of an hour from his position at the woodpile, and in all that time, not one of the 7 moved in any way he could detect. No hand lifted, no head turned, not one of the 4 children shifted weight from foot to foot, the way a child shifts weight when forced to stand still against every natural impulse they possess. They simply stood and looked at the wood. After a while, Pruitt set down his splitting maul and went back to his barn and did not look toward the Merrow chimney again that morning, or for several mornings after. He could not say why he avoided looking. Callahan's notes do not show that he pressed Pruitt to explain it. The statement, as it was written, ends on that detail and does not return to it. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Callahan rode up to the property the following morning and spent most of the day going through the cabin and outbuildings in order. What he set down in his report described a household held in a state of suspended routine. The beds had been slept in and not remade, which was the single detail across the entire property that sat at odds with the ordered evening pattern Dent had described. The lamps held oil. The wood box beside the hearth was stacked to the full and ready for a morning fire that had not been lit. A piece of needlework, Callahan identified it as a chair cover in progress, worked in blue thread on linen backing, lay on the seat of the rocking chair by the front window with the needle still threaded and drawn half through the last completed stitch, the tail of the thread hanging loose over the arm of the chair, as though the woman doing it had simply stood up in the middle of a row and walked out without finishing the motion her hands had been making. At the north edge of the yard, where the grass gave way to the first timber, Callahan described a series of depressions in the earth consistent with a number of people having stood in one place for a sustained period. He measured, or described by approximation, an area roughly 18 feet wide and 3 feet deep from front to back, where the ground had been compressed in a manner distinct from ordinary foot traffic. He could not establish from those marks which direction the people had moved when they finally left that position. He noted only that the impressions faced the wood and that the trampled ground ended at the base of the tree line without any corresponding track leading away from it in any direction he could identify. He wrote to County Judge Absalom Kearns requesting authorization for a formal missing persons inquiry. Kearns replied by letter 2 weeks later, directing Callahan to continue his investigation and submit a supplemental report before the December circuit sitting. The December sitting passed. No supplemental report from Callahan appears in the Cardin County archive for that period. Gideon Marsh, a social welfare assessor who reviewed the file during a statewide rural conditions survey in 1919, noted the absence and described the Merrow matter as an unresolved disappearance of 7 persons whose file had been reduced from its original length by an unspecified process and at an unspecified date. He recommended further inquiry. None was conducted. Callahan himself resigned his deputy's commission in the spring of 1915, after 19 years in the post, and removed to Lexington, where he took work in a dry goods concern and, as far as any surviving record shows, never spoke publicly about the Merrow case or any other matter from his years in the Upper Hollow. Two other cases belong beside the Merrow disappearance because the specific details they hold in common are difficult to dismiss once you have read all three together. In late summer of 1907, the Callum family vanished from their hollow in Breathitt County, Kentucky, approximately 60 miles northwest of Blackhollow Ridge, as a crow would fly, which is not how anything moves through that country. There were 5 of them: Josiah Callum, a corn farmer of 50 years, his wife, and their 3 adult sons. They were found missing by a cousin named Warren Callum, 41, who had ridden up from Canal City to settle a debt and found the property in exactly the same condition Dent would find the Merrow place 7 years later: the farm in working order, the animals penned, the food stores intact, and not a person anywhere on the land. A woman named Fern Tackett, 64 years old, who had lived adjacent to the Callum farm for more than 2 decades, told the Breathitt County inquest that she had seen all 5 members of the family standing at the edge of their woodlot in the days before they were reported missing, all of them together at the woodline, looking into the trees. She had supposed at the time they might be watching an animal in the timber. The inquest asked her whether she still believed that. She said she did not know what she believed, and that she had not slept easy in the months since she had given the matter any sustained thought. In Knott County, in 1912, a man named Eldon Fitch left a note on the door of his cabin before he vanished from it. Fitch was 38 years old, a trapper and part-time schoolteacher who had worked a line in the upper hollows of his county for 11 years without any report of unusual behavior or difficulty. The note was written in pencil on the back of a merchant's handbill and read, "They have been at the woodline 3 nights running. The 4th night I am going to see." Fitch was never found. The note is currently held in the clerk's office in Hindman. It is 3 inches wide and 5 inches long. The hand that wrote it was not in a hurry. 3 events in a band of eastern Kentucky roughly 80 miles wide, falling within 7 years of one another. The silent standing at the tree line, the abrupt and total departure, the household left in evening order as though morning would come in the ordinary way. These are not details that move between isolated ridge communities with no road between them. The Merrows had no documented connection to the Callum family. Eldon Fitch had no known connection to either. No county record in that period acknowledges the others. Whatever the 3 cases hold in common, each of them arrived at it alone. What the Merrow record itself refuses to give up is worth stating plainly. The 11 pages Callahan originally filed included, according to Marsh's 1919 notation, a 3rd witness statement taken from a man Marsh identified only as a timber worker with seasonal access to the upper ridge. Marsh described this account as the most specific of the 3 original testimonies and as the one he found hardest to account for within any ordinary reading of the family's absence. That statement is not among the 4 pages remaining in the Merrow file. Marsh's notation is the only evidence it ever existed. The Cardin County Daybook for October and November of 1914 runs without interruption, except for one stretch, 6 days in the 2nd week of November, for which the pages have been removed from the binding. The stubs are clean and even at the gutter. They were cut with something sharp. Whatever Callahan wrote during those 6 days is gone from the public record. Whether it concerned the Merrow property or something else he found in a subsequent visit to the hollow is not answerable from what remains. What remains is the gap, and the even line of the stubs, and the fact that those 6 days fall in the weeks between Callahan's first documented visit to the property and his resignation the following spring. What follows is taken directly from the closing paragraph of Hezekiah Pruitt's statement, written in Callahan's own hand beneath the body of Pruitt's testimony under the heading Assessor's Note in lettering smaller than the rest of the document. I have set down the above as accurately as I am able, and have not altered the substance of what Pruitt told me. I will add only this. In the course of examining the Merrow property on the 14th of October, 1914, I found at the north edge of the yard, at the line where the cleared ground meets the first timber, a series of marks in the bark of 7 beech trees, standing in a row at the wood line. The marks on each tree ran from a point at approximately chest height down to the root line at the ground. They were not axe marks. They were not made by a bear or by any other animal I am able to name from knowledge or from experience in this county. They were made by something moving against the bark with a sustained downward pressure, and they are consistent in width and in depth across all 7 trees in a manner that indicates deliberateness in the making of them. Each groove runs 3/4 of an inch deep at its deepest passage and does not vary materially in width along its full length from origin to termination. The 7 trees stand at intervals of approximately 4 feet from one to the next. 7 trees, 7 grooves, 7 people absent from the yard behind them. I have set this down because I believe it should be set down, and because I was not certain it would be included in any report filed by another hand above mine. I have not returned to the property since the date of this examination. The land at Blackhollow Ridge has not been farmed since 1914. The timber concern that sent Dent up with his surveyor's rod never built the spur road. Their records note the project suspended and offer no reason for it. Cardin County took the Merrow property for unpaid taxes in 1922 and has held it since, unimproved and unoccupied. Hunters who pass through tend to agree, when the subject comes up, that the area has a quality difficult to put into words and that most of them are content not to press. A county land assessor who surveyed the property in 1978 noted the presence of 7 beech trees standing in a row at the north edge of what had once been the yard. He noted them as features of the landscape. He did not mention the bark. Whether that reflects the absence of the marks Callahan described, or the assessor's decision not to look closely at the bark, or his decision, having looked, to keep what he found out of his report, is not something the available record can settle. What the Pruitt statement establishes, taken at its word, is this. 7 people stood in the yard of a working farm in September of 1914 and looked into the trees at the north edge of their property, all of them still and quiet, for the better part of a quarter of an hour. Some weeks later they were gone from that property in a manner that did not suggest they had decided to leave. The tree line where they had stood held marks in 7 beech trees that a deputy with 19 years of service could not attribute to any cause he was able to name. That deputy resigned his post within months of his examination and did not speak publicly of the matter again. 6 days of his record were cut from the daybook. The file he built to 11 pages was returned to 4. The Merrow family farmed Blackhollow Ridge for 4 decades. One September morning in 1914, they stood in their yard and looked at the trees on the north side of their property, all 7 of them, still and quiet as stones, and then some weeks went by, and Floyd Dent came up the ridge with his surveyor's rod, and the door was open by an inch, and the dishes were stacked clean on the table, and the needle was still threaded in the embroidery on the rocking chair by the window. None of them have ever been accounted for. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.